Recording in progress.
Call this special board meeting, January 28th. Session, there, call roll, please.
Student trustee Kvinsland. Trustee Bloyd.
Here.
Trustee Griffin.
Here.
Trustee Schaefer.
Here.
Trustee Morton.
Here.
Trustee Ohm.
Here.
Recording in progress.
All right, approval of agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Please call Aaron.
Trustee Bloyd.
Here.
Yes. Trustee Griffin.
Yes.
Trustee Schaefer.
Yes.
Trustee Morton.
Yes.
Trustee Ohm.
Yes. Okay, well, we're a little moving right along. Do we have anyone out there out in the world?
I don't see anyone.
Okay. Marshall, I don't think you have anything to address off the agenda. All righty. Jason said that Gabby called and was running a little late to get home. He's going to join us to go over his proposal, but I'll give just a little recap. Let Emily fill in if she has anything else to fill in. I have a little spreadsheet, maybe I forgot it. But basically,
Do you want to put the
yeah, sure.
slides on the?
I don't know if Aaron has them. Gabby was going to go over them.
This was attached.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay, yeah. So we got there was the three proposals. Two of them were quite close. One of them was way more. And primarily for that reason, but also I think for a few other reasons, I think we all agreed that we weren't interested in pursuing that third vendor. I think they were, I want to say 600 or 700,000 above the other two.
Yeah, it was for a smaller.
Yeah,
A
they
little bit
initially did a
smaller.
smaller array, and
They
the price went up when they amended it to make it the right size.
They
So
apparently
it went even
are
higher.
they apparently are working in the area. They sent a letter suggesting that that's one of the reasons we should hire them, and it makes so much sense. And yet they're more expensive. So we didn't spend too much time looking over their proposal. Of the other two, they were pretty close in cost. When I made my little spreadsheet, I just looked at the kilowatt array size, the price, and how much of the work they were planning on self-performing, which I think is critical in terms of timeline, because that's one of the most important, not most, but a very important aspect of this is meeting that NEEM connection deadline that we have of May 2026. Is that right, Emily?
April
April
2026.
April 2026. So,
Is that the date that PG&E approves the installation, or is that the date we go online after?
that's the date that PG&E comes and signs off on the work.
Okay.
So
PTO
if you look at the,
inspection.
on their schedule, they have a line item that says call for something or other
PTO,
inspection.
yeah.
And then there's about a month, I think, and it says PG&E or something, utility approval or something. Theoretically, they could come and they could look and say, well, you got to change this or that. So that deadline is for them to say system okay.
So is it, I mean, I know at one point we were talking about having a deadline that had that many months in advance of.
Well, the Centrica's original schedule they proposed showed that date beyond our connection date, which, as much as we liked the rest of their proposal, was not going to work for us. So Gabby went back to them. I don't know if you've shared that latest. Just today,
He's here now.
Okay. Gabby, you here with us?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can.
Thank you.
Great.
So I was just giving a little recap to the other board members of our discussion, and I'll just finish up real quickly, and then I'll let you take over.
Yep.
And so Gavi discussed their timeline with them and got them to shorten it a bit. And he'll go into more detail. There's a few sections that, for example, DSA permitting, hopefully will take less time than they've given, but it's not really within their purview to actually, mandate how quickly it's going to take DSA to review the application.
So on the current timeline, when does construction occur?
Well, that's part of why we have the special meeting, is to try and get things moving as quickly as possible.
Right.
The geotech would begin imminently. Construction, I don't have.
So
that in
November
front of
7th.
me. November 7th.
So, I mean, is there a problem doing the construction in the rainy season, or is that something we just can't avoid.
So let's just, now that Gavi's here, let's let him go ahead and take over
Okay.
and do his presentation. So I'll summarize is that Emily and Jason and I agreed that the Centrica is the preferred contractor, assuming they were able to tighten up their timeline, and they did to some degree. So the idea is to have Gavi present what he's shared with us, and then we can have further discussion and go from there. So go ahead, Gavi, take it away.
Yep. Can you guys all see the screen and hear me? Great. Well, my name's Gavi Amuna. If I wasn't already introduced before I hopped on, I'm a project manager at NV5, and I've been assisting the school district with the initial feasibility and then putting out this bid for getting vendors to develop this project of yours. So thank you for having me, and happy to answer any questions during this meeting, and hopefully we can run through this and get everything squared away. So without further ado, in terms of an agenda, we can briefly go over the submitted proposals and look at the quantity.
One sec, Gavi.
Yeah.
I don't think, is he getting his screen? Because I'm seeing something that I'm not seeing there.
It is on Zoom, and he's going through it. He's
okay.
sharing his now, so I'm not sure why that isn't doing it.
Is it? I can reshare if that's. Is that better?
Is it just a feed issue with what's? Yeah, I think it's
If it's easier for you all.
we got it now.
We're good. We just needed to adjust something on our side.
Okay, great. If that happens again, happy for you guys to take over the slides, and I can be audio, but presenting with you guys in control of the slides. But if you can all see this, then we can progress. Jumping back into it, looking at doing a quick summary of the submitted proposals. I know you guys hopefully have all read the proposals or had some synopsis summary of it and these slides. There's also some appendices slides that give more detailed information. But then hoping to look at the quantitative analysis, as that is, one of the metrics that we use to score these proposals and come to a recommendation. And then that project schedule and some of the vendor scoring and how we evaluated these three proposals. And then next steps, looking at, what is next for this project. So, 1 sec. All right. So in total, there were three proposals: Centrica, Symmetric, and Sizerco. That is actually quite great for the industry, especially for one site way up in rural Northern California. We've been seeing a lot more interested parties with much more complicated, systems and projects for multi-site. So it's great that you guys got the three interested bidders that you did. The project base price on average, and we'll get into it later, but Sizerco was an outlier price-wise, was about $1.5 million. And then there's also some EV charging infrastructure that was incorporated as well into the RFP. So moving along into, there's a lot of text on this slide, but we looked at some of the strengths and weaknesses of each proposal. Centrica and Symmetric both had market-aligned pricing that we've seen. Sizerco had quite more expensive pricing. They all had a decent amount of experience. Symmetric, actually, it was unclear their experience. And when we were doing our due diligence, we couldn't even find the solar that they were referencing as their, highlighted projects. We did a Google Earth search aerial view. There was no solar at the sites that they were claiming. So that was a little bit of a red flag. Centrica had great experience, healthy financials. They're not going to go out of business anytime soon. And a lot of their work is in-house, which is great in terms of a kind of one-stop shop. You guys will get all of your survey and geotech, electrical, civil, structural, everything from them, rather than having them manage quite a few other subcontractors, which was more like what Symmetric was proposing. One thing I did want to note, and Centrica came back with a revised schedule that I got a couple of days after I submitted this slide deck to the board, was they did initially have their schedule as the beginning of this meeting mentioned, right around the deadline for that NEM 2. But they have since walked it back, and now there's a bit of a month or so cushion, which is great. And then if DSA is quicker than the 21 weeks or so that they claimed, then the schedule will be even quicker than that. The only other weakness they really had was that their EV charging pricing was quite a bit overpriced for what we have seen across the market and for similar projects. So that's an area wherein I would encourage the district to push back a bit on if moving forward with Centrica, is try to bring them down a bit on that price point, or negotiate how to make that more cost efficient.
Is that something that could be standalone?
Yeah, so the way we set up the proposal and released it to the bidders, the EV was an additive alternative. So it is completely up to the district whether or not they contract for the EV scope or if they just do solar. You guys have the power to do that under the proposal method, the government code 4217. So that's to your discretion. I will note, however, that there is, as of July 1st, 2024, Title 24, a lot of 24s. Title 24 is one of the government codes, regulations. They are requiring EV charging in parking lots for new construction, and the new construction being either a building or, like in this case, a canopy of solar. So there are some restrictions or requirements for including some form of EV charging, but I think that there's some flexibility on that.
So what
All
is,
right.
can you just ballpark the difference between in the Centrica EV cost versus what you consider a normal cost?
Yeah, we typically, in terms of all-in pricing, we typically estimate about 25, 30K all in per charger, and they're coming in closer to 70K. So almost double, or more than double. And I asked in the interviews, that was one of the questions that we asked them. They were citing that with the directional boring and the way that they were thinking of doing the underground trenching and all of that construction aspect, that they'd have to do a second bore shot, and there was quite a bit more work for the EV. I think my team could definitely argue that back, and I think there's definitely there's other ways to get the same result that doesn't have that high of a price tag.
Stub outs we already have at the main entrance to fulfill the Title 24 requirement?
That would be something to take up with DSA. I don't know the answer to that. I can look into that for you, but generally speaking, the requirement is about equal access to shade and kind of some of that, as well as equal access to charging. So typically it's combined and put under the canopies. If the district could argue that the upper parking lot is the same parking lot as the one that the canopy is covering, that, it's one school parking lot for all intents and purposes, there's a chance that you could just use the stub outs up front. You may have to do a slight amendment and put up some sort of shading, just like a aluminum or tin roof or something over one of the chargers, something that kind of is equivalent to equal access to shade and, weather protection, but not actually solar panels. So that's maybe something but it wouldn't look great in front of the school, I think, aesthetics wise. So that is something I'm going to progress with the presentation unless there's more to discuss on that point. But that's definitely something that yeah.
finishing the EV part is not integral to PG&E's acceptance of the work that's been done, is it?
Are you talking in reference to keeping the NEM2 grandfathering?
Well, yeah. I mean, in other words, if we had everything done but the EV part, because we went to another bidder for the EV part, and we weren't able to meet, it doesn't have the same deadline. We have a compliance issue, but we don't have that isn't really part of what PG&E is about, is it?
Correct. Yeah, it's a compliance or regulatory issue, but PG&E should still, provide that PTO letter of PTO, even if the charging isn't there. All right. Moving on to getting into the quantitative section. I did want to actually first highlight, before diving into the numbers, the differences between the left and right columns under each entity or bidder. There's a note on the right here, but basically what we were looking at is when we first started this analysis for the district, it was in the midst of this electrification effort of the diesel and propane tanks and boilers, generators, and all that being turned into electric versions. So the left column is including the about total 2 million in what we anticipate is avoided costs, and then anything more than that is from the solar. So the right columns in each section are just solar alone, and then the left is counting the solar as offsetting the costs of fuel and natural gas or diesel, whatever you used, and instead deriving that fuel, that heat, that electricity, etc., from a renewable source rather than from a non-renewable source. So as you guys can see, centric and symmetric are pretty similar in terms of the nominal savings, slightly different in terms of the discount rate and the net present value, but still both, around 1.7, 1.8 million on the left, right, including those offsets, and around 0.2 million, not including offsets. And then Siserco, as I mentioned before, it's quite a bit more expensive. You can see that base cost is almost double the other two proposals. And then it actually results in a discounted negative loss to the district. So this was one of the big drivers behind eliminating Siserco. As there are mentions, in the previous slide, in the qualitative section, there's still some arguments to be made for Siserco potentially, in that they have projects going on with Fort Bragg and City of Willits, so nearby, and they wanted to add this to their portfolio. But I think from a price perspective, I don't think it's smart for the nor do I know if the district has the funding for 2.3 million in costs and having a loss lifetime in the project savings. So any questions on this slide?
I don't know if this comes in here or not, but if tariffs were to actually happen, what does that do to the whole project?
Yeah, so all of these prices would go up a bit. We don't exactly know what the tariff situation is going to look like. It's a bit of a crystal ball. I did have some notes, I believe later on, maybe in the appendices, but that once contracted with one of these, and for argument's sake, we'll say Centrica, but once contracted with Centrica, I think it would be quite prudent for the district to jump on an early procurement of those materials in order to avoid the tariffs, because it's based, a lot of those tariffs are based on the date of purchase. So if you're able to release Centrica or Symmetric or Siserco, one of them, to procure the solar panels and have an agreement for the steel and whatnot ahead of schedule and kind of in parallel with design, then that could alleviate some of that risk of tariffs. But you're right that the tariffs would result in a slightly more expensive project.
Step back a second in the sense that if we're counting on 30% tax credit or in lieu of tax credit from the federal government, doesn't that require domestic sourcing?
That domestic sourcing is for the adder to get the 40%. The 30% ITC is a shoe-in for you all, that you're right, a tax exempt public entity, public school district, and so you kind of get a just a check from the IRS, that you quote unquote overpaid your taxes by 30% of the listed project costs. And I should note that that should be 30% of not just the base cost of this, but 30% of all costs, inclusive of project development costs, such as our consultant fees, the district's legal, council fees, permitting costs, et cetera. So the vast majority of the project costs on a whole are eligible.
Right.
But that doesn't have any risk. That there's some risk if the project doesn't get built until I think 2027 is when it really starts to, or Trump is trying to knock it down percentage wise. But currently, our understanding is that your project is not at risk of not receiving that 30%.
But isn't there a domestic vendor or domestic sourcing part of that legislation?
Only to get more than the 30%.
Only to get more than
There,
30%.
yeah, for this project, it's if you want more than 30%, there is a requirement that's a steeper percentage of domestic content for projects that are over a megawatt. You guys are at 200 or so kilowatts, so quite a bit under that.
Right, got it. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good question though. This is just a visual representation of the table before, showing the cumulative savings, so not discounted, but just the raw savings. I will also touch on, actually quickly, I'll jump back. These savings, one of our assumptions was a 3% escalation with utility costs every year. If utility costs, like in the past couple of years with PG&E, are higher than 3%, then your savings increase accordingly. So while the 50-year historical average is around 3%, we tend to use 3% to be conservative. The past, 3 or 4 years, it's been closer to, 10, 12% a year. So hopefully for the general populace, it does not stay at 10% because that doesn't seem sustainable for ratepayers. But for the project's financials, the higher the rate increase, the better for the financials here. So that's just a note that this 1.7 or 2.8 million, the final lifetime savings, are conservative estimates, and it's likely, and we're hopeful that it's higher than that. So this is kind of a worst case. Moving on to the schedule. This is a time-sensitive project, right? And quite prudent to move fast, still holistic and get everything in the contracting and all of that the district needs to cover its bases, and to, I think, cover some risk with the NEM2, and see if Centrica is willing to abide by having some sort of liquidated damages or some sort of penalty for not hitting the NEM2 deadline. But this is the tentative schedule for what I think we should shoot for in order to maintain that NEM2 grandfathering project schedule on a whole. So it's great that the board, kind of met preemptively still in late January. And we're hoping to announce it to the selected vendor and then start contracting in parallel with design and releasing geotech and survey to take a look at the site, because that takes 6 or so weeks.
What are you proposing as a penalty for not meeting the deadline?
Great question. The closer we get to the deadline, the more risk averse all of these bidders will be. So the less willing they'll be to um, take any kind of fiscal penalties. Um, we haven't done an analysis of if you miss the deadline, what the financial returns over the lifetime of the system look like. That is something that we can work on if the district so wishes for us to do, kind of in parallel with contracting and try to work something there. But usually we're seeing that with system sized, 90 to 100% offset of any given meter or site. If they lose the grandfathering, or if they jumped from NEM 2 to net billing or NEM 3, it can be as much as like a 70% reduction in savings. So you're looking at, we can jump back. If you're looking at just nominally and we're just looking at solar, you're looking at 500,000 in lost savings.
Well, I mean, you're going to be negotiating with whoever we select. And obviously, this bidder started out at a disadvantage because their original timeline was beyond what we need. So we've already pushed them back to something that fits, but at the same time, what kind of risk are we taking if they can't do that? And you're saying ultimately that risk is in the $500,000 range.
That is my off the cuff number. I would have to actually talk to my data analyst to come up with an answer for you. But yes, my initial off the cuff answer is a couple 100,000. All right. So moving right along, this was a comparative little table looking at the different schedules. We definitely flagged symmetric energy, I'll say, because they didn't seem to account for the due diligence and design. They seemed to think that due diligence was already done, and we had made it very clear in the RFP that it's up to each bidder and vendor to do their own due diligence. Because for any construction project, right, you don't want to have the developer base any kind of construction or basis on, the client. They need to do their own work from a legal protection standpoint. So it's looking like, about June is when they finish completion, moving into mobilization and starting construction in the winter. To your earlier point, yeah, there could be some delays if it's a heavy rain year. I think so that may push out the substantial completion date a bit. But hopefully not too far out. All right. This was some further detail on the scheduling. So as I mentioned, symmetric schedule didn't seem to really account for some of the due diligence, survey, topo, and full design. Centrica did get back to us and said that they could speed up the schedule. And I hope that you guys were able to take a look at that. They're coming in closer to March 2026 and much sooner than that if DSA, takes 10 weeks rather than 21. Getting to some of the scoring, because part of this procurement method and contracting method with 4217 is we need to be able to show that, the district selected the bidder that was quote unquote best value to the district. It doesn't have to be the lowest cost, but it has to be best value. So this was the rubric that we used to score. You can see that the top one is more the quantitative one with the lifetime savings, and the rest are a little bit more qualitative and subjective based on the quality of the firm, experience, system design, and schedule. This is where we landed on a scoring criteria. You can see that Centrica was up there, 1 or 2 for the first couple, and then this was done before they had sent the revised schedule, so they got dinged a couple points for that project schedule, proposed schedule. That's why they're third in that middle section. And then they did have slightly more expensive O&M costs, but those are on the order of magnitude across the board of 5 to 7K a year. So that's why it wasn't weighted as heavily, but it's still something to consider, that you will be paying some over the 25 years lifetime of the system to manage it, make sure it's washed, and make sure there's no rust, and that it's performing as expected. All right, moving right along. To kind of summarize the above qualitative and quantitative sections and evaluations, our recommendation is to move forward with contract negotiations with Centrica. They did have one of the lowest cost bids. They met all of the requirements. They do have quite a bit of experience building similar projects, and they are open to being aggressive and proactive with their schedule, and trying to, as hard as they can or as best as they can, meet the NEM2 deadline. Also, their reference checks only had great things to say about them, and a couple of their references were also more rural, tucked away school districts.
I noticed that you had a lot of non-responses for the people you looked for references from.
I did, yeah.
I mean, it seemed like over half the people that you tried to contact, you didn't get a response from.
Yeah, that's not too out of the ordinary. People are busy and getting a strange phone call, they may not respond. But yeah, I mean, we can definitely follow up and call. I called, all of the ones that they listed and called a couple times. But their responses may also trickle in over the next week or two. Just a couple days ago, I got a call back from Fort Bragg, I think it was. So they're somewhat responsive. In terms of next steps, I guess we've kind of touched on the first one, and then down to the second one of the district and the board to select which one they want to go with, which bidder, and then to enter contract negotiations. That will be more so the district's legal and the selected bidders legal counsel working through terms. NV5 can provide technical consultation, make sure that those specs for the design are all, included in the contract, and make sure that they're going to be using the proper materials, including, the NEMA 4R, the like corrosion resistant metal for the steel, and then closures, copper wiring, all of that. But we are not legal counsel ourselves. We're not attorneys. So that will be a next step, is to start negotiations, and letting your legal counsel know that this will be coming down the pike. And then we have a bit of time for that 40-17 findings. The findings we've kind of already done. Those nominal, we have to provide a cash flow table. NV5 has already done that. But then in terms of kind of an announcement, a public, notice, put it on a bulletin board at least 2 weeks prior to a board meeting. We can help with that. We have templates for what to say. It obviously has to be stamped and signed or whatnot have your letterhead on it. But aside from that, it's a pretty straightforward process to meet this requirement for Government Code 4217. Great. That was all I had without diving into the appendices.
The goal is to approve the actual contract at our March meeting.
Yes. However, you do have the flexibility to move forward with a letter of intent or like a conditional notice to proceed for design, and survey or geotech before that. So we don't, lose the next 6 weeks or a month, because that would be pretty injurious to the project schedule. So if you guys make a decision tonight or in the next week or two, we can just announce that to the selected design builder, and they'll probably ask for some sort of letter, hard copy, or email, but some sort of notice that they can point to, so that they can mobilize their teams.
So the Centrica is using Vietnamese panels.
Yeah.
What's your experience with those panels?
Yeah, we haven't had any issues with them. I mean, a lot of panels come from Asian markets. There's a ton of solar development going on over there. So as long as this Bloomberg tier rating is kind of the gold standard for what we'd use across the industry, we don't accept any tier 2 or tier 3 modules. So that's kind of a stamp of approval for the manufacturing quality. So nothing negative to say about Bouvier Solar.
So in one of your notes, you have that it may have tariffs applied pending April 25th final determination. So that's a previous tariff situation. Do we assume that the bidder is taking that into account and is held accountable for that price regardless of whether these tariffs come into effect?
So that's what I touched on briefly earlier, is trying to get to a point where they would be comfortable procuring the solar panels as early as possible in order to avoid the April 2025 final determination. So that may or may not happen. April is coming on us pretty fast, but they may also have inventory in stock already in a warehouse in America, or they may be able to shuffle modules, because usually when they order modules, it's tagged to a certain project, but they may be able to change that and have existing modules that they've had in the warehouse for the past 6 months switched over and tagged to this project, and then procure other modules for a project that they're doing maybe in 2 or 3 years.
And that'll all be part of your negotiations with the district?
Yeah, we can touch on that.
It seems to me that would be a clause in the contract that I'd want to see. The district isn't liable for that potential. I mean, this obviously is a year or so longer tariff investigation into whether Vietnamese panels are actually truly Vietnamese or whether they're really Chinese panels. Isn't that the issue?
No, well, kind of. If they're manufactured in the Vietnamese location, the location in Vietnam, then yes, they're Vietnamese panels. But Bouvier Solar is opening a plant in the U.S., especially with the nervousness around increased tariffs, is I think what's driving some of their interest in developing a plant or a manufacturing location in the U.S. I just as a cautionary note, I have a hard time believing that they would be okay with that in the contract of an ironclad no tariffs, because if the tariffs come back quite a bit more expensive, they may ask for a change order just to cover their expenses. So I think the easier path forward would be to ask Centrica to procure modules in advance, somewhat at risk, and store them in a warehouse before all of the tariffs hit.
Gavi, what is the standard sort of way of doing a contract for these things? Is it a flat, I mean, this is a flat bid, right? It's not like it's time and materials or anything like that.
No, it's not time and materials. It's usually just a construction contract,
right?
Design and construction.
Where there's a bottom line number that we pay at the end of the day for the entire project.
Yeah, and a contingency built into it, and there's phases or milestones when they would invoice. Yeah.
So wouldn't they be taking on that risk of any change in the cost of materials? And isn't that already built into their bid?
They would, but they can pass those through to the district as like additional construction costs or procurement costs.
Okay. It seems like they'd have to state that up front. And yeah, it seems like that's come up in other contracts I've seen. That's why contractors might ask for early procurement, which is what you're suggesting. So I guess it would just see whether they want to put that in. And part of why we're trying to move this along as quickly as possible is to give that the opportunity for early procurement. But ultimately, that's between them and our legal to come up with the final contract and for you to look it over for us, I guess.
Well, what I'm saying is that these particular tariffs that we're talking about are not Trump tariffs.
Right.
These are Biden tariffs.
Okay, and they're not in effect yet, or they
what?
are? Are they not in effect, or they are?
They have the Department of Commerce announced on November 29th, 2024, that these would potentially come into effect. And I think there's a period of time, for negotiations and whatnot. And it's, so that's totally different from the 25%
Right.
Trump tariff. These are ones that they, have known about at least since November 29th, and therefore should have factored into their price and not expect us to pay the difference. But
the new tariff for Boviat is only 0.81%.
Yeah. I mean, if you,
So,
it's not high. They should be able to absorb it.
Yeah, that's something ultimately to be the legal teams to hash out. And they may have already procured quite a few of these modules in advance and in expectation of that tariff. So that's a conversation to have with Centrica.
I'd like to make sure that there's a directive that they attempt to utilize our infrastructure that we already put in for EV charging on the top of the campus. On the other hand, I don't want to slow things down with DSA where they might kick it back because they don't like that. So I don't know if it can be put in as we'd like to do this, but if you say no, we'll do that.
Well, my feeling, just on the little I know at this point, but if they're charging 3 times what is considered, or 2.5 times what is considered the appropriate price for that, to just exclude that from the bidding and deal with that obligation separately.
Right, which if we were using an architecture firm to apply for a DSA permit, we could apply for the permit for all of it, contract with these guys to do Part A, and then go to someone else for Part B.
Right.
But we're using them to apply for the permits as well, and that's not going to fly with DSA.
Yeah, I will say also, it seems like at least in my experience, DSA has been a lot more amenable to striking items that they have already approved than adding new ones. So when we enter into that design phase, we can still operate under the assumption that they have to design for the added EV conduit run and trench over to the northern canopy location. And then if that needs to be amended and it gets approved to do the, chargers out front, then I think that's a pretty small revision and would be. Yep, exactly. That's how we set it up in the RFP, is that the EV scope is an alternate item.
I have another question. Does your firm have experience, or do you know if Centrica has experience with installing systems really close to the ocean? I'm saying closer than Fort Bragg, which is sort of a different environment.
Yeah, Centrica's Coast USD is right on the ocean as well. And we have a couple of clients that have, because we don't do any direct installation. We sit on the, the district side of the design and making sure that these, developers abide by our requirements. But yeah, we have quite a few requirements built into our technical specs that should be built into the contract for materials and design for marine environments. Yep.
Tobin, any questions, comments?
I'll just restate what I've told the board before about my trepidation about putting the panels on top of the hill for two reasons. My understanding is that the full amount of the array will more or less make the whole campus net zero. My argument to not do the panels up top is twofold. One is the proximity to the building up here, the using of potential valuable real estate for other purposes in the future. Three, aesthetics, and having that large structure, which I've tried to impress upon you, the actual size of these things based on the specs were provided. But my other argument is based on the fact that the board kind of dropped the ball in terms of making this an environmentally sustainable project from the beginning. And I feel like this is a Band-Aid to try to make up for that when we have a gym filled with, I believe, single pane windows, not very efficient. And I think trying to balance that on the back of a bunch of PV arrays put around campus, I'm not looking forward to another year of disruption around construction. That's worth $500,000 to me right there. So I do think it's a little bit silly that we did not design this project from the ground up as with this in mind, and now we are having to find areas to put PVs, including one that I disagree with, which is on top of the hill. I have come to, I think the parking lot one makes as much sense as anywhere else on campus. I do not think the one on the hill makes sense. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments, Tobin. A couple things. The windows in the gym could be upgraded, could be replaced at any time in the future. And I'm sure you remember part of the decision about the gym and the costs would have gone up exponentially if we'd moved to further work. I feel like we have been discussing these photovoltaic arrays pretty much since we started planning the bond work, and it has been a challenging discussion of where to place them, with all of us having different ideas and different reasons why. So I respect your opinion. Ultimately, I feel like we've come up with about the most practical location. And as far as whether we're hitting net zero, they're all throwing these numbers around at us. I don't know where we're going to be. I doubt we're going to be fully offsetting is my guess. I could be wrong, but even the numbers, Emily had a long back and forth where she ran a bunch of different numbers, and we'll see. But I really would rather get as close as we possibly can. And I do understand the aesthetic. I think part of it, there was a big fight in town about the first array, and there's certain things that it's shifting our perception of what we will accept to look at for doing what we believe in terms of the climate. So that's where I come from in supporting it. I don't know if you all want to respond to Tobin?
Gavi, I have a question for you on this. Some of the bidders did propose different layouts than the one we had proposed to them. Is there any room in the design phase, and is there any space in that lower parking lot to put more panels? Or is that not feasible?
I think without cutting away some of the hill, it would be challenging unless you are rerouting those bus routes, because I know and redoing that parking lot restructuring or the parking lot restriping plan with QK. I think the risk there is also if you put another canopy right next to the hill, without fencing it off, it would be very easy for kids to climb up onto it, or creatures or other, things to happen, and get on top because it would be level with the height of the hill. I know a while back we were looking at ground mount over in the field. I guess to first address your first question, yes, in the design phase with any of the design builder entities such as Centrica, we can still hash this out with them a bit more. I would caution that, the NEM2 grandfathering is submitted for a certain size system. So you'd want to stay around that size. But outside of that, you can still change around the design a bit.
Emily, did you want me to share the usage that I calculated for the rest of the year? Or?
I don't know that we need to share it. I mean, our usage has gone way up in the past year, to the point where in November and December, we were using like 47,000, 50,000 kilowatt hours compared to the previous November to December was 20,000. So we've more than doubled our electrical usage.
Which is to be expected.
Because we took all of the propane and diesel offline and went electric and built a whole new campus. I had hoped that a lot of the energy efficient pieces of the new campus would help, but it doesn't look like they have.
So only the box in the middle is correct. I didn't do any of the other calculations or any other updates.
I'm sorry?
Only the box in the middle, the chart,
In the box.
the buy one, and the cost. So this,
Oh,
none of the other stuff is updated. I just wanted to make sure that I had,
Yeah.
I brought the numbers. It's just the monthly numbers are updated.
So we took a look at the bills. You guys provided us access to it, and it's looking at, for all of 2024, 302,000 kilowatt hours. But I don't know exactly when all of that propane and diesel came online. I think it was midway through the year.
And the Centrica proposal, I think it said a first year estimate was 261,000 kilowatt hours of production, correct?
Yeah. We were projecting closer to 280, but they're building in a kind of performance guarantee. Regardless, the current system is designed to offset about 93% of the load, at least in comparison to all of 2024 calendar year usage.
Yeah, to me, the size is right. It's, if we could put all the panels in the parking lot, that would be great. I just don't think we can. And so, to me, this is the second best alternative. To me, this upper space is just empty space, and if you have carport-like panels, it can be shaded and have picnic tables underneath it and actually be a space that could be used in some ways. It's not perfect, but it's, I think, the best of all the options, and we took quite a while looking at them, so.
How many panels are there going to be?
Well, they're all.
Gabi, could you put up the the layout with the panels showing I think
Yeah.
the appendices? Thank you.
Apologies, one sec. There we go. There's two canopies, each vertical, like north, south, should have about 5 panels, and then it's running along, and each width is going to have, I don't actually have the exact proposal from Centrica pulled up, but 2 main canopies, and then in terms of the actual modules themselves, they're a portion of it.
questions, comments from anyone?
Looks like 362 modules, so each one being 3 by 5, something like that, feet.
Anything you want to add?
I don't think so.
I'll make a motion to approve NV5's recommendation and the Facilities Committee's recommendation to proceed with the Centrica bid and proceed with all deliberate speed to getting into contract with them and having them get going.
Second?
Further discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about it.
What, sorry, go ahead, Michael?
I'd like to, now that we have a motion on the
Yes,
floor,
by all means.
we haven't analyzed where the money's coming from, how much the total cost is going to be, and what impact that has. Our total cost is probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of what, 1.3, $1.4 million, including, what we are paying NV5.
Hopefully not 1.4, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I think closer to just under 1.3, I would guess, but yeah.
I mean, once we, approve a contractor, that triggers an additional $60-some thousand in the 5 costs. At this point, we don't have those funds.
So can I give you an update on that?
Yeah.
Please.
So we received our 15-day letter from
Okay,
the
that's
state.
good news.
Meg and I had a call today with school facility consultants and Mark Quattrochi to go over all of the things they're asking for. And Mark was very helpful, and so was school facility consultants. I've always wondered why we're paying them, but today it was worth it. Because they were very, very helpful, and they essentially take care of the requirements from that letter. So we're going to get that letter in by February 8th, and he's estimating that it should be that around May that we get the money.
And how much money are they anticipating we'll get?
He didn't tell me a number, but last I heard it was something around 1.2 million. But I don't know what the exact number is.
Uh-huh.
I can try and find that out, what the latest number while this discussion's happening.
Because at one point we had heard something like close to 1.5, but
Yeah, let me see if I can do some digging.
And we won't receive whatever rebate we get back from the federal
Right.
government well into the future.
yes, not in time to pay for
Not in time to pay
anything.
for anything.
Do you know how much we have in phase 3 funding right now unspent?
I don't.
Is it, do you have even a ballpark guess, or do you, Emily? 400 maybe, something like that? Or-
I think we have about $1 million,
I think we have more than that, or more than.
because we haven't spent very much of the phase
Okay.
3 yet. It's not
We haven't.
technically
Okay.
been burdened yet.
Yeah.
Okay. So, to answer your, answer your question, if it was a question or not, but I see us using our phase 3 money as needed until we get the state money. That's how I see us paying for it. But I'm open to other suggestions, but we have that.
We also have Fund 17 to cover.
Yes.
It's
I'd rather
used
use-
as a bridge loan.
I'd rather use our bond money to do this work than Fund 17, but I'm open to.
It scares me to use Fund 17.
So the expectation is that we'll be using unspent bond money plus the state funds that we'll get to pay for this. And I'll have it all, and I'll have it, when do we anticipate having to spend money? If we go ahead with Centrica now, when was the first payment we have to make to them?
Well, that would be out in the negotiations they'll set up.
Right, I know, I
Oh,
understand.
yeah. If they go for early procurement, they'll probably be wanting some chunks of money sooner than later.
Right,
I don't, depends
so
on
we'll
how.
take that out of bond money until it's replenished by the state money potentially in May.
That would be my recommendation.
Well, I think, having got the 15-day letter makes me a little more reassured that it's going to happen in time. I don't know.
It says, back in The project is estimated to receive approximately 1.3 million.
And that's for the part of the high school project that we completed, right?
Yeah, but it's really interesting. They base everything on, for some reason, 1998. So we have to submit information on what this school looked like in 1998. And the number of SDC students we had in 1998, and so it's a racket. But yeah, it's not based on this particular building.
Well, that's probably beneficial in the sense we had a lot more students in 1988.
Right, and we have more classrooms. Well, no, it's probably similar classrooms. but,
Yeah, classrooms.
Yeah, it's digging back and back. And,
Right.
So that's why Mark was very helpful, because he has a lot of that information.
Mhm. So are you more reassured?
No. I mean, I want to see the money. I mean, it's just, anything can happen, right? But, I mean, I think hearing those guys today, they are more assured than I am, and to hear their assurance is assuring.
So are these dollars coming out of the proceeds of the most recent bond sale that we passed in November? Or are they coming out of previous bond sales?
Hold on, that answer was just in here. Let's see, find it again. Please note, funding for this project is available from the governor's 23-24 budget and is not affected by the proposed 24-25 budget. So I guess it's on the prior. It wasn't on the most recent.
Okay.
I have an email from November 25th of 2024 saying that the amount is about 1.36 million.
It's almost exactly our anticipated costs for this project, potentially.
So, okay, if we eliminate that anxiety from our discussion, what about Tobin's issue about aesthetics? Is that only, I mean, does anybody share Tobin's concern about that, or is that just something that?
Yeah, but I have
I mean, I
solar panels I
responded.
see every single day when I
Yeah,
drive
I mean,
out
I
my
responded to
driveway.
him, and I definitely share it. I wanted
Yeah.
to cut down more cypress trees and put them out where the trees are, put them on the far side of the track. It wasn't my first choice.
I agree too. It's not my first choice, but it seems like the best choice now.
Were we against cutting the large cypress trees because of the expenses of taking away all those branches and?
It was an expense and permitting. It was kind of twofold, I think, was the main.
At this
issues
point, we
there.
don't have to get a new permit,
No.
because the areas that we've chosen are part of what the permit previously issued grants.
But that permit showed a bunch of options.
Right.
It showed both of these sites. It showed the hill. It showed way down at the end. It showed, I think it might even.
I don't think it showed all of them.
No? Okay, it
But
showed
it's
several.
just
I thought we were told that if we cut trees down, that was going to be,
That's its own.
right.
Yeah, that's its
permit.
own challenges.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And there's significant cost. I think we talked about $100,000 at one point,
Right.
something like that.
It would be a lot, because not only would the trees have to be cut, the stumps would have to go away probably, because we'd be trying to use it as ground mount
Yeah, and then
area.
there's-
It
yeah.
definitely would have been,
Earthwork as well.
yeah, considerable expense there.
So you raised your hand, Canoe, about the aesthetic issue. Do you want to weigh in?
Well, as far as the student perspective, I'd say that the most important thing to the students was that the far side of the track didn't have solar panels on it. But beyond that, they didn't really mind about the location, but I'd guess that they would prefer them not to be up on the hill because just of the impact of the view. And yeah. Why couldn't we do it on the hill by the comm school? That hill, wasn't that a proposed site at one point?
It was discussed.
I don't think it was ever one of the ones we seriously discussed. There were some
You mean
issues.
the hill above the
But
track?
Beyond
Yeah.
the track, between the track and the arts center.
Oh, well, there's no exposure.
No.
No,
It's the hill right down,
The hill between the
parking
drive
lot
and
and the
the,
track.
yeah.
I think installation cost was a negative, obstructing the view
You have to
for
put a
people, for
6-foot fence all
spectators.
the way around it, so
You
you
know,
lose a
everyone
lot.
loves to hang out on the road and watch the games, and that would pretty well, because not, any of the ground mount ones require a fence, 6-foot tall fence around them.
Okay.
So you'd have a fence around the entire perimeter, plus them being, I'm not sure exactly how high off the ground, 4 or 8 feet or 4 to 6 feet, something like that.
Yeah, they're about 4 feet off. There's also the consideration, and sorry, my laptop died. There's also the consideration of where the panels are facing. So facing south is the most efficient for power production. Facing north, obviously the worst, and then east and west is not ideal, but you can get the same amount of production just with more panels. So if it was facing, if I'm visualizing where you were suggesting, if it was facing west on the slope, you would need more panels and more space allocated to the solar to get the same amount of offset and potential glare at that angle of slope, among other considerations.
Thank you.
The final precise location, Gavi, will be based on the geotechnical, is that correct? Particularly for the top of the hill, in terms of how close the posts can be to the edge of the hill?
Correct, yeah, and exact orientation. And the top of the hill one, the height at which you guys can, or the final design can state for the columns, will also slightly dictate from the soils report. But we were designing for that height to be above the windows in the view of anyone, you know, looking out from the building or underneath looking out at the view. So we were, in putting together this proposal, cognizant of trying to minimize impact from the hill or by the gym of, you know, disrupting the view, because it is quite beautiful up there.
And if we are clear of our fire route, what's the minimum height on the low side of a carport array?
So that's, I mean, that's up to, if you're not over a drive aisle, either emergency vehicle or, you know, it's not categorized as a parking lot. If it's just a gravel area, it can be anywhere from ground mount to, you know, 13, 16 feet high. The argument there, and there's a couple different ones, are that I think if it's low down, the building would potentially shade it and impact that production. If it's high up, it'll avoid the building, but it'll be more obstructive, I guess, visually. But if there's no cars outside of that fire access lane loop around the tall, there, the main building, there's not much of a height restriction.
But no, I was saying, how low can it be? That was my question. Like before you basically become a ground mount, I guess, right?
I mean, it could be. I guess is my retort. Is that?
Right, yeah, exactly. So at what point do you need a fence? I guess that's the triggering question.
I see. I would say 10 feet is typically what we have seen.
Another question. The north-south length on the carport styles are 40 feet, 20 feet cantilever each way, is that correct?
Say that again. What do you?
The north-south length of the carport type array total is 40 feet with a post in the halfway?
Yeah, the posts don't have to be halfway. It depends on if you're doing single cantilever, dual cantilever canopies. Because you can also do smaller arrays, like instead of doing 5 or 6 modules wide, north-south, you can do 3 or 4, and you can do a single cantilever.
For the maximum cantilever, if you're doing single post.
Yeah, it's about 40 feet.
Okay, so that in that aspect, hang that thing out over the hill. I was brainstorming, well, would we want to go with ground mount up here, which would be more affordable, but basically would require more of the area because we can't hang it out over the hill on that 20-foot cantilever. But the geotechs are going to come back to us and say, well, they're not going to let us put that post right on the edge. Do you have any knowledge of the soils here at all, and could you even throw out any guess on how close they might allow a post, or is that no sense in even doing that until geotech does their work?
That's a question aimed at me. I have not received any documentation from QKA or the district on, geotech or soil support, so I can't speak to that. But I think that's worth asking the district architect, right, that you guys just finished the remodeling, renovation of the building. They may have something.
We didn't do much. The footprint stayed exactly the same, so I don't know if there was a geotechnical done at the top of the hill, but we could ask.
Yeah, I doubt it as well. Although I when I was doing some Google earthing of the building and looking at historic changes, it did seem like a couple of years ago, maybe even a couple of decades ago, that there was an addition added to the to the main building. So I don't know if that's worth digging around in and seeing if, when you did that new addition, if they did a soils report.
This question for fellow board members is considering ground mount up here something we want to talk about. I'm not. I think in some ways it might actually.
Tobin, would that make you happier or less happy?
I think it might obstruct. I think it might obstruct the view more from inside the building, as far as what you see. Like, these things are big, and a carport thing is gonna well, that's a big thing out there. Yeah, it's gonna. You're not gonna not notice it. Whereas a ground mount, there's a fence with something inside it. The solar panels. It's kind of how I think one might perceive it.
Does this fence have to be in any code, it's a metal fence or something?
Typically it's chain link, I imagine.
Because if it's chain link, I'd say it's probably more obstructive to the
We could
view.
probably clad it in redwood. It would just be more expensive. It has to have a certain height. It's mainly just obviously keeping people out.
Yeah.
I know there was some photos in some of the early presentations. There's already a small chain link fence out there. Have you noticed it?
Yeah.
Around where the propane tank used to be? That's typical, what you'd see.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys are interested in that as an option, it would be a pretty quick effort for me and my data team to look at the shading impacts. So we can keep the size the same and drop down the height to be a ground mount, and see if, what the building would actually shade and how it would impact them.
I don't think it makes sense to start opening up this can of worms all over again. I think we either bite the bullet and say yes, or we vote no and say, it isn't worth it.
Fair enough.
Don't do it on my behalf. That eliminates the other possibility of doing anything with real estate underneath of it.
True.
I think what we want to do is look at the cantilever, because when you measure 20 feet out, you're getting really close to the building, so you're definitely going to need the 13 or whatever for
You're talking about this way, 20 feet.
Yeah,
Right.
based on, if you put the post somewhere around where that propane tank, that 20 feet is coming within 15 feet of the building,
I would think we want to put the post as close to the edge as geotech will let us, basically.
And then if the cantilever doesn't have to be even, and you can even, put it up over the edge even more and not have it so close to the building, that would help. Because part of it's having it so close to the building.
Right. Gavi, on a single post array, can you cantilever more than 20 feet one way? Can you make it asymmetrical?
Yeah, you can do the cantilever coming in at if we're counting from south to north of 1, 2, 3, 4, you can do it in between 1 and 2. So you can cantilever it just after, the first row of modules, and then there's 2 or 3 hanging over. I will, though, bring up, and I guess you guys would know better than me, but My understanding is that Mendocino can get some pretty high winds, and the wind loading conditions, especially with DSA, I think they're going to bring that up, and the structural calcs and structural engineers are going to bring that up. So if wind loading is a concern, they may veto that option.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Definitely a concern. Any other questions, comments? Go ahead, Aaron. Let's call.
Student trustee Quinlan.
Yes.
Trustee Bloyd.
Yes.
Trustee Griffin.
Yes.
Trustee Schaefer.
Yes.
Trustee Morton.
Yes.
Trustee Ohm.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Gabi, for joining us. I'm sure we'll be in touch soon.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you for
Gabby.
having me.
Okay. All right.
Great. Have a good evening.
Okay. Thank you all.